The 1978 Halloween is still the horror genre's standard when it comes to spooky movies. From its pacing,
just the two of us,
to its jump scares, to a mass killer that just gets up and walks away, the original Halloween still holds true today to being one of the most influential horror movies of all time. But how well do you actually know the film? Hey moviegoers, welcome to another video. My name is The Hero, and today we're gonna take a deep dive into one of the best horror movies of all time, and hopefully find some things that you might have missed. To start with, what is a film without its lead star? And that's exactly what John Carpenter was gonna find. John Carpenter considered the hiring of Jamie Lee Curtis as the ultimate tribute to Alfred Hitchcock, who had given her mother, Janet Leigh, legendary status in Psycho. However, John Carpenter had his work cut out for him, because during the same period, Universal Studio producers and director Richard Franklin were trying to enroll Jamie Lee Curtis in the new production of Psycho 2. From a budget of $300,000, the film went on to gross $47 million at the US box office. In today's time, the earnings would be the equivalent of $150 million, making Halloween one of the most successful independent films of all time. The craziest thing to me is still they got $300K. Have you ever heard the saying, money don't grow on trees? Well, that quote resonated with the cast and crew of Halloween. The original script, titled The Babysitter Murders, had the events take place over the space of several days. It was a budgetary decision to change the script to have everything happen on the same day. Doing this reduced the number of costume changes and locations required, and it was decided that Halloween, the scariest night of the year, was the perfect night for this to happen. And boy were they right, because when I was a kid and I watched this movie for the first time, I was absolutely terrified of Michael Myers showing up in my room. And honestly, this helped push the movie even more forward, because this film became a classic that is celebrated every single year and brought more and more viewers every Halloween season. One of the worst critiques that this franchise gets is that Michael Myers always outlives everything he goes through. But actually, that was John Carpenter's real intent with the character. Michael Myers was supposed to be a fictional character that the audience should never be able to relate to. And the mysteriousness about his character is what John Carpenter loved. So much that the story is actually based on an experience John Carpenter had in college, touring a psychiatric hospital. Carpenter actually met a child who stared at him, quote, with a look of evil, and it terrified me. Huh. Now, where have I heard that before? If you guys know me very well, one of the coolest things that I love about film is how they get the sound design for that film. And one of the coolest things in the Halloween movie is that the stabbing sound effect is actually a knife stabbing a watermelon. Juicy. As we know, when it comes to movies, the budget is the main problem that producers and directors run into. Well, for this movie in particular, John Carpenter and crew knew exactly what they wanted to spend their budget on. Half of the $300,000 budget was spent on the Panavision cameras, so the film would have a 2.35:1 scope. And in order to get Donald Pleasence on board, he was actually paid $20,000 for only 5 days of work. But let's not forget this fact, that Halloween was actually only shot in 20 days in the spring of 1978. That's right, only 20 days. Shoot, can you imagine nowadays if we were to do something like that? Marvel wouldn't even have time for CGI. Too soon? When making a movie, 90% of the time, scenes are shot out of order. And it didn't change with this film. John Carpenter actually had to come up with a fear meter, as he says, to help Jamie Lee Curtis know what level of terror she was supposed to be acting in. I mean, if it was me, I would just be like automatically terror 24/7, because I mean, this is Michael Myers you're talking about. Either that or I'd ask for an autograph. You know how we all have our own sense of style? Well, it literally came down to that for this film for most of the actors. All of the actors wore their own clothes since there was no money for a costume department. Jamie Lee Curtis actually went to JCPenney for Laurie Strode's wardrobe, where she spent less than $100 for the entire set. Sometimes films are shown a little early to a test audience to decide what they should keep in and what audiences are starting to feel about this film before its actual release date. Except that Carpenter showed an executive the film actually without music, and unfortunately the executive didn't like it that much. She actually said that it wasn't scary at all. A film that does so well that it actually holds the standard for horror movies everywhere, especially slasher films, to get told that your movie wasn't scary at all. But John Carpenter knew exactly what he was gonna do. After the film was released and the executive saw it, she changed her mind instantly, an indication of how much John Carpenter's score adds to the film's atmosphere. But simply because of how great the score actually is and how many different variations of it plays throughout the film, many filmmakers and film buffs actually classify the Halloween theme as a character in itself. But how does music become its own character? Simply by doing what a character does, connecting you with it. Every time you hear it, dread comes over you, and the anticipation about what's gonna happen next. Sometimes time doesn't agree with you, and you have to film a movie when you can. Well, Halloween wasn't much different, as the movie was actually shot in early spring in Southern California, as opposed to Illinois in late October. The crew had to buy paper leaves from a decorator and paint them in the desired autumn colors, and then scatter them in the filming locations. To save money, after a scene was filmed, the leaves were collected and reused. However, as Jamie Lee Curtis and John Carpenter note on the DVD audio commentary, the trees are quite full and green, and even some palm trees can be seen, and you actually might recognize a familiar face that actually helped throw bags of dead leaves on set for one day.
No, it's so funny. I actually had a roommate back when they did the original Halloween, the John Carpenter one, and I wasn't working. He conned me into going to Pasadena one day with garbage bags full of dead leaves. And we were working on the set of the original Halloween movie, throwing the dead leaves around, so it looked like autumn, so it looked like fall back in the Midwest.
Inside Laurie Strode's bedroom, you actually might have missed something. There's actually a poster of a painting by James Ensor, who was a Belgian expressionist painter who used to portray human figures wearing grotesque masks. Now, doesn't that sound like someone we know? And sometimes things don't go as planned on set. When they were shooting the scenes for the start of the film, all the ones seen from Michael's point of view, they couldn't get the 6-year-old child actor until the last day of shooting. So the movie's producer Debra Hill volunteered to be Michael for any scenes where his hands come into view. This is actually why the nails on young Michael's hands look so manicured and varnished. Or can a slasher just go get his nails done before he kills his sister? Like, is that so wrong? In a 2010 documentary, it was revealed that 5 different people dressed as the Shape. Nick Castle throughout most of the movie, Tony Moran, who actually played Michael when he was unmasked by Laurie Strode, stuntman James Winburn, production designer Tommy Lee Wallace, due to his knowledge of how much force would be needed to break props during action shots in a single take, and unbelievably co-writer co-producer Debra Hill in the external wide shot when Tommy sees the Shape for the first time. And honestly, I can't tell the difference between all of them. But if you didn't know what the horror buffs know, Nick Castle was actually on set just to watch the movie be filmed. It was actually the suggestion of John Carpenter that he took up the role of Michael Myers, simply because he was just standing there looking creepy anyway. But even though Nick Castle wasn't a trained actor, John Carpenter's direction for Castle in his role as Myers was actually minimal. When Castle asked what Myers' motivation was for a particular scene, Carpenter replied that his motivation was to walk from one set marker to another. Carpenter also instructed Castle to tilt his head a couple of times as if he was observing the corpse, particularly in the scene when Myers impaled one of his victims against a wall. You remember how I said that things can sometimes go wrong on set, even unintentionally? Well, other times it makes it to the final cut. To ensure Michael Myers would break the window of the station wagon, a wrench was adhered to his forearm and hand. It was then painted flesh colored to hide from the camera, but it is still clearly visible in the shot. So I know we all get upset when an animal passes away in a movie, but you have to admit how they did this shot was actually pretty cool. To achieve the shot of Michael Myers strangling the dog, the trainer on set held the dog in his arms and dropped him naturally. This was shown in slow motion to make it look as if the dog had been killed. However, no dogs were harmed on set. It was the boogeyman is a very iconic line for this film that many horror fans will remember for future generations. But if you look closely at Jamie Lee Curtis on her right cheek, there are noticeable lines. Jamie Lee Curtis actually explained that those lines are there because the scene was shot immediately following lunch break, during which time Jamie Lee Curtis had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room downstairs, which left an impression on her face. I mean, when you're on a budget and you have so little time, no time can be wasted, including letting your face go back to normal. There's always that one song that always appears in every horror movie ever, and if you don't have it, what are you doing? When Laurie Strode and Annie Brackett are driving in the car, they are listening to Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. This is actually on while Michael Myers is driving behind them, foreshadowing what is to come in the future for the characters. Now, these are just a few facts from this film, as that there's so much that you can still learn and discover about this film as well. But I'm gonna leave you with this one more fact, and honestly is one of the coolest ones that I never noticed for years until I seen it. The famous US poster for the movie, the knife blade bending in with the ridges of the jack-o'-lantern behind it, and the tagline, "The night he came home," actually contains several subliminal images. The blurred image of a screaming woman can be seen reflected in the knife blade, and a second screaming face can be seen in the shape of the hand gripping the hilt. And to think that this film only started on a small budget in Hollywood, and it was the dream of some young filmmakers to become one of the most iconic horror franchise of all all time. From literally stabbing in the dark, as Ice Nine Kills puts it, and trying to find a direction that this movie would go, to being remembered for future generations for decades and decades later. Halloween 1978 will forever be known as the original slasher horror film. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you guys leave a like on the video, as well as hit the subscribe button and the bell icon, so you don't miss any of my movie facts or other things that you might have missed in future movies to come. There's also a couple of links down in the description that you might want to check out. Also, down in the comments below, make sure you guys leave a comment about what film you would like me to do next. And as I always say, moviegoers, stay nerdy, stay geeky, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye!